when it's accelerated to seeing things that aren't there and then self-identifying, and then we involve the parents or don't, because that's another issue. If we involve the parents and say, hey, we're seeing this in your kid, and your kid is even acknowledging it and endorsing it, we recommend going to therapy. And then they come into my office and we do what I described earlier, is they say, my kid has dissociative identity disorder. Look, she's slipping into, hallucinations right there. Look, you can see her. She's got tics. It's like, well, that seems performative to me. Is it across every environment? What's the experience here? What are your personalities? And the child can't identify it. All they know is that they need a belonging, and this gives them some belonging. Would that have ever even occurred had the school-based mental health professionals not been on site? I don't know. And maybe we are making things worse.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Philman. At The Reason We Learn, we aspire to be part of the solution. The purpose of this show is to take a good, honest, potentially painful look at the way kids are being educated. We know we can do better, and this is where we'll talk about how. Let's learn something. Thank you for tuning into The Reason We Learn. If you're not already a subscriber, make sure you click the subscribe button and the bell so you'll be notified of future episodes. You may have noticed that mental health, sometimes referred to as wellness or well-being, has, both in terms of funding and staffing, become job number one for most schools these days. And you may even have heard that students can't learn until they've been seen, heard, and assessed psychologically. Earlier, I sat down to talk with Jake Wiskerchen, marriage and family therapist, national certified counselor, and founder of Nevada-based Zephyr Wellness, to get an update on what's going on in counseling, especially in schools. I asked Jake because of his broad and deep experience in the field. He's given consultations, talks, seminars, continuing education classes, and staff trainings to many agencies, groups, organizations, and individuals, including the Nevada Bar Association, Northern Nevada Law Enforcement Academy, Nevada State Civil Attorneys Association, Reno and Sparks Chamber of Commerce, University of Nevada, Washoe County School District, Nevada School Counselors Association, Nevada Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence, Lyon County School District, Pershing County School District, 6th Judicial District Court, VanNess Group Homes, and CSA Head Start. And he's the host of not one but two podcasts, Noggin Notes and Guns and Mental Health. In this show, you will learn why mental health is front and center in education right now, and why that might be too much of an otherwise good thing. Hey, Jake, how are you today?
I am great talking to you.
Well, I'm really grateful that you decided to come back. For those who are not aware, this is Jake's second trip to The Reason We Learn. And I'm very grateful because I'm always eager to talk to people who are on the ground and working in the field of therapy and mental health, because obviously I talk about it a lot and it is not my area of expertise. I think you have some stuff to tell us, update us on what's going on in your world.
A lot. I don't remember when the last time I was on, maybe 3 years ago. It's been a minute, but
I don't think it was that long, was it? Oh my God.
Maybe, I don't know. I didn't actually look. Did we talk about Walk the Talk America back then? Is that why I was on talking about guns and mental health?
It was about the gun rights and mental health because of red flag laws and things like that. So we did touch on that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's tough to quantify everything in a short encapsulation. We just spent a half hour talking about it to try to distill it into something coherent and digestible. But we'll take another swing here and see. So I don't know about since then what's occurred, but what I'm noticing these days in a lot of where I touch the community, which is substantial, I would say, is that we're seeing an erosion, I think, of certainly parent autonomy and the ability to influence what their kids are being exposed to in schools. It seems to me that we as parents, I'll say, we as parents are just swallowing whole whatever the schools are offering and just smiling and nodding and moving along, probably because our lives are really busy as it is, where we've got our own distractions, we've got our own addictions to technology, and we just shuffle along and keep it moving, right? And so for the listening audience who may not know anything about me, I'm a marriage and family therapist. I'm licensed in Nevada. I own and operate a clinical practice called Zephyr Wellness, and we do a lot of community-based things. So we partner with schools and school districts, and I've been doing this for a little over 9 years with the agency. And a lot of the work I'm very, very proud to have done, especially in the rural areas of Nevada where they don't have services at all, really, to speak of, outside of maybe a state rural clinic here or there. So one of the things that we did many years ago was try to do school-based mental health, and really nobody was doing that until we were doing it. So I don't want to sound like I'm too overly rigid. There were people doing it, but really it started to take off when Zephyr was out there kind of proving the concept. And I'm being able to go into a rural community where people are suffering and they don't know where to go is, I mean, it's an overwhelming, humbling experience to be able to provide. So we would physically drive out to these places that are 60, 90 miles away from Reno and offer services on the ground in person. It was really great. And then, you know, COVID hit and the lockdowns were despicable, but what at the time I distinctly remember telling many people, I said, if nothing else comes from this, it's going to compel our profession to get good at teletherapy because it's something that we'd been averse to for years and years. And we're always suspicious of technology because for whatever reason, my profession thinks that it's the only one who handles confidential information. So we didn't think that it worked or whatever. So that helped accelerate a lot of the access to care that many people were not getting. Now, the backdrop of this is that Nevada consistently ranks dead last in the country for behavioral health care provision, access, providers, and so forth. So it's not like opening up the access opportunities really solve the problem because you still got the same deficiency with providers. But what we did at our agency was we made some changes that make us a little unorthodox. Like we limit our current patients to no more than 4 appointments at a time on the calendar so we don't artificially clog it. And we also make sure that we say up front, there is a termination point to treatment. It's supposed to be time limited. We're going to target your goals very precisely. We're going to work very hard. We're going to treat problems and not symptoms so that you get completed treatment at the end of this. We're not interested in having you Tuesday at 4 p.m. in perpetuity. So it sends a meta message of sorts to both the patients and the practitioners, say, this isn't forever. You will get done. So we've been able to receive a lot of the increased interest, pretty well. We've absorbed that. We've got some really good results. We've got people cured and they go about their lives. So I didn't have a problem offering more services to more communities, knowing that we operated differently. So that all being said, we engaged in this multi-tiered systems of support model, MTSS, and I know you're familiar with it. Probably your listeners are too. And we said, all right, tier one services, the way that we see it is we teach emotional functioning. Everybody understands how their brains work in response to environment. It's not in any curricula really, and it's not to be confused with SEL. SEL, as currently marketed, is something very, very different, and there's a very, very strong emphasis on the S and not so much the E of the SEL. Ours is just E. You do with that as you wish in your social circles, but we need you to know what your 10 core emotions are. And that was pretty good. And then tier two looked like, groups of kids who are struggling with the same issue, whether it's, parent breakup or suicidal ideation or loss or grief or something like that. And then tier three was reserved for one-on-one psychotherapy, like the actual legitimately diagnosable conditions, meaning you're sick, right? And so that was really good and it worked really well. And we tried to implement it in a few other areas that are also provider deficient, like Head Start. We applied for grant, missed, somebody else got it. Did it in a few other schools, and it really worked well. But in recent months, I'm starting to change my mind because what I'm seeing is an over pathologization of normal life response to environment. So just because you had a bad day or you failed a test doesn't mean you're depressed or you're anxious or you're mentally ill, amounting to diagnosable care. But that's what we're doing when we start to issue school-wide or even district-wide surveys or inventories or assessments to every student under the auspices of tier one supports. What I'm seeing is an overabundance of students who don't necessarily have medical diagnoses that would amount to meeting criteria for critical care or, intrusive care being identified and then being placed into services. And this runs the range from mental health to speech to occupational to all sorts of, what we would call infirmities, I guess, that might interfere with a student's ability to learn. And so in response to this, districts and schools end up hiring staff to confront the need. And then when those people get in place, they end up staying and they end up mining for more problems just to justify their own existences. Now, I realize that there's a fine line here, but it is present. There is a line, and we have to be very mindful about whether or not we're teaching parents and children to be afraid of being deficient in certain skill sets or being behind developmentally in one area or another, and then saying that's okay, your kid will grow out of it, versus it's not okay, you need my support. And I think that's the rub there that I'm starting to see. And I don't want to call it a grifting opportunity. I think more help is usually a good thing, but in some cases what we've done is we've sent a message to the community that anything that deviates from whatever our standards are, whatever the survey of the inventory comes back to tell us is a little bit off, is now pathologized, meaning it's really bad and you need professional care intrusively intervening in your life. And I just jotted down some numbers before we start because I was curious about how much money this really contains. And in the last 4 years, we got the CARES Act, which was about $2.2 trillion. The ARP or ARPA funds, which is the American Recovery Project or program or whatever plan, $350 billion. Then we have ESSER, which is targeted in the elementary schools for $190 billion. So we've got trillions of dollars here that have now created this self-fulfilling prophecy of students who have problems, quote unquote, if you can't see the air quotes that I'm putting on the screen, that need to be addressed by professionals, and we'll just hire those professionals. Now, my fear is that where the money goes or comes from when the grants run out, are we just going to print more? Are we going to continue to tell people that they're constantly problematic in perpetuity? Because I don't know what happens to those professionals once the money runs out. And I don't know what happens with the students if we fail to mine the data. And one reasonable comparison, I don't know if it's apples to apples, but it's close. I just realized that this year in Nevada, because our legislature voted last legislative session to stop funding it, we're not doing the free school lunch for everybody program anymore. And my kid, who started kindergarten in 2020, is now entering 4th grade. And there's a whole slew of kids whose families have never, if they chose to, have had to make a cold lunch to bring to school. Now, what happens if the money runs out and the federal government or the state governments decide not to fund these school-based mental health or whatever support services? What do the families do if they've been told for years and years and years that the kids need help, and then the help goes away? We're going to induce an even bigger panic because we've artificially created an expectation that help will be there if you need it, if your kid just can't say his R's correctly in 2nd grade. It's like, well, maybe he's going to grow out of it by 3rd grade. Maybe he doesn't need a speech therapist to be involved. So there's problems all over the place. And I know I just fire hosed everybody with a bunch of stuff. So I'll pause there because I tend to ramble when I get going, and I'll just get your reflections.
No, it's valuable information. People don't have access to this very easily. And you've said a lot of things that I can respond to. First of all, I'm glad you brought up the money. I've brought up on this channel before that Secretary Cardona has made several videos reaching out to state legislatures, to teachers unions, to school counseling associations, you name it, even to parents, saying the money's going to run out. The money's going to run out, and you need to cultivate what he calls sustainable sources of funding for mental health supports. Now, what does that look like? Well, he's happy to tell you. That looks like lobbying your state legislature to auto bill Medicaid from the school. And then that also looks like lobbying your state legislature to increase taxes, to put bond measures on the table, you name it. They are purposely getting out ahead of the running out of funds and saying things like Congress may not reauthorize spending for mental health. So we create a political situation where they can exploit this perceived need to get votes. Vote for me and I'll keep the funding going. Vote for me, I'll appropriate more funding at the federal level. And then locally or statewide, vote for me and I'll make sure there's a sustainable funding source, or we will build Medicaid, et cetera. And the people on the other end are never questioning, was this necessary to start with? So the presumption that we're starting with is, as you pointed out, all this pathologizing of childhood and the vicissitudes of life is normal and necessary. We've normalized this, and now we have to figure out how to pay for it. So they're already in the sandbox of we have to pay for the thing, and nobody's stepping back and doing what you're doing and saying, wait, time out. Do we need the thing at this level, or are we potentially actually hurting the kids who really do need it? That sort of minority of kids who genuinely have a need, although it should terminate at some point, because it's now everybody needs it.
Yep.
And there's one thing that you sort of touched on, but then because we talked about money, you didn't get to delve into it, and that's part statement, part question. I'm always concerned what the message is, not just to parents about your child has a need and now there's no way to fill it, but what is the message to children? These are growing, developing minds. And you mentioned, and I'm glad that you did, that the focus of SEL is on the S, the social, not the emotional. And so what have we done when we are sort of cultivating an emotional fragility around my ability to learn is contingent on me getting these services? Are we potentially hobbling these kids or sort of artificially handicapping them emotionally to cope with things that maybe they struggle with, that they're going to need to struggle with a little bit more in order to get stronger? Just like with exercise, we can't just send someone in and magically make you stronger. At a certain point, you have to push through. So what do you think it's doing to the kids psychologically and possibly even socially to be trained from the earliest age that they have this need that only others can fulfill?
I think it's creating a victim mentality for sure. And we see that rampant where people have externalized responsibility to the other. It's the system, it's my parents, it's the school, it's the whatever it is, right? For not meeting my needs as I see fit. And it's creating a very narcissistic, self centered, desirous, almost hedonistic, instant gratification mentality, whereby if I'm the least little bit uncomfortable, you need to attend to me and do it now on my terms, or I'm going to scream and rage and go write my legislators or whatever. So there's that. And I fear that as children grow into adults and they age, that those mentalities don't shift. They don't shift to something of resilience and overcoming and distress tolerance. They shift into permanent victim mentality and no accountability whatsoever. And I don't want to beat that horse too badly, but I'm seeing it already. And I also don't want to like take too much credit for being a Cassandra or a canary in a coal mine, but I was on this like years and years ago, long before the lockdowns and all that stuff happened, when I would see it in the form of IEPs and 504s that had supports built in for individual students. And they'd come in here and say, oh, my kid has ADHD, help him. And I say, okay, well, hold on. First of all, we don't do fix my kid. This isn't jujitsu. You don't drop them off for an hour and come back and have some magical skill set. You as the parents are the executives of your home, and you need to be actively involved in your child's therapy and treatment. And then I started questioning, does your kid really need the supports at school? Well, yes, he can't focus on tests. All right, let's teach him some distraction avoidance then. Let's teach him some distress tolerance. Well, what is he going to do when he gets to college without the IEP? I don't know. I guess figure it out. What's he going to do when he gets to work without the IEP? So a lot of this is I think a reflexive, fear-based response from the parents who have been told for many years that their kid is off kilter and will end up like, in prison if they don't deal with their distraction avoidance. And my response is no. Load them up with more stuff to do that's productive, not just more busy work, but like challenge the child. Trauma history aside, I'm not dealing with that. I'm talking about just a run-of-the-mill kid who just bounces off the walls in school, right? So I was already pushing back on this circa 2014, 15, 16. This is not new to me. My response, though, not to be a complainer without a solution, is we have to learn adequately what our brains do in response to environment. So a few years ago, I created a video series. It's for free. It's downloadable. You can go to the Zephyr Wellness website and see it. And it's on YouTube. It's just me and standing in front of a whiteboard talking about feelings. And we have 10 core emotions. These are well-researched. There's like 70 years worth of documentation undergirding it. And essentially the point is, emotion is not bottomless. It is tolerable, but you have to be able to push through and endure it in order to train your brain that you can do it again. And what I think what we're doing is we're bailing people out of their emotional states to the point that we're conditioning the brain to think that emotion is not tolerable. And when we get there, as we grow through life, the amplitude of the emotions gets bigger because we just, more things are at stake, and the stakes are higher. And so we just don't engage anymore. And what that creates is a lack of vulnerability to engage the distress. And through the lack of vulnerability, we lose intimacy. So we're losing our intimate partner connections. We're losing our relational connections. We're losing our ability to follow instructions at work. We're losing our ability to dialogue because we just don't want to be uncomfortable. Now, overlay that with this motif of, words are violence, and all the people who are out there saying that if you cause me emotional distress by simply challenging my worldview, that is tantamount to harm, and harm is unethical. Therefore, counselors are told that if you push somebody into disequilibrium to challenge their worldview because their worldview isn't working, because otherwise, if it were, they wouldn't be in therapy, that is tantamount to unethical conduct. So then we get affirming care. And I don't mean gender affirming care, although that's where it started, but it's affirming anything the patient brings in. And that includes the parents with their ADHD kid saying, my kid is ADHD. And we as practitioners need to have the spine to stand up and go, well, actually, I'll be doing the diagnosing here. Thank you. And we're not. We're just rolling with it, presuming that this stated problem is a problem. We're not unearthing why it's a problem or where it manifested. And we're just saying, yep, I guess give them some headphones and some ice to chew on in class if that's what helps them stay focused on the test. And so we've externalized. This is why I say externalizing is a big problem. We've externalized the problem resolution to the ice or the headphones or the gum chewing or whatever it may be, instead of looking deep within the child and saying, hey, why don't you just sit in this despair for a while? Why don't you just sit with your embarrassment and feel it, let it go, and then in the next moment, your brain has learned that it can tolerate it, and you can move into the next series of events in your life that will probably also be distressing, because that's how life is. Things don't just go your way all the time, and you will be okay. And you can get through that way. To teach it an emotional wave. It's like beginning, middle, end. And the middle is right where we lose control over whether or not we feel something. And in the end, we go, oh, okay, that wasn't so bad. I survived. The Earth didn't spin off its axis or whatever. We're just losing that. And because we're losing it, we've taught distress tolerance is not possible, and you're just going to get what you want. And if you don't get what you want, throw a fit until you do. So that it really falls in on itself. And we've got parents who can't tolerate that their kid's not doing whatever the kid wants to do. And this isn't just in schools. This is in little leagues, and it's in the work environment if they're teenagers, and all the way into college and post grad and all sorts of stuff. It's created an entitlement across the culture. And I think it gets back to emotional functioning. If you know your emotions really, really well, you know how to respond properly to the environmental stimuli that cause the emotion, and you can move forward with self-sufficiency, not other supports, not external influences that will help you get through that. So it is a big problem. I'm seeing it everywhere. And you and I are big fans of Jonathan Haidt's work, teaching kids that they need to stay off social media for a whole bunch of reasons. You can read his stuff. I don't have to regurgitate it here. Stay off devices as much as you can. But what are we doing in the school setting? We're introducing them to individual devices and saying, this is how you educate. You educate through the screen. The screen will teach you. You're an empty vessel into which knowledge is dumped. And oh, by the way, we will curate the knowledge for you. Nobody's being taught how to think. They're taught what to think, and they're taught to be reliant and dependent upon the device or the Google search or whatever it is that we're sticking in front of them, rather than saying, hey, go to the card catalog at the library and solve it yourself. Sound out the words. Don't just ask me to say what they are. That's little forms of distress tolerance that we can teach our kids that I think we're outsourcing it.
Right. Well, the other thing we've done is, and I think it's in response to this snowball going downhill of, creating all of this fragility, basically, is that the pedagogy itself has moved from the knowledge distribution or transfer to one of letting students know or believe, I actually won't be able to learn any knowledge until I feel okay. So that's like a precursor for, we have to have high self-esteem before we can learn. We have to feel comfortable. We have to feel belonging. We have to feel included. And I wanted to respond to something else that you said, because, as you were talking, there were so many things you said that I think most parents listening would agree with, in terms of well, yeah, I actually want my child to be resilient. I want them to learn, resourcefulness and have some grit and all these things. It's a rare parent that's going, no, I want my kid to be this way forever. But I can't shake the feeling that so much of all of this is still situation specific, meaning that because we have a standardized school system, a one size fits all system for the education of our young, where the kids are spending 8 hours a day essentially being parented by somebody else in a building or in a couple of buildings, that what we're calling discomfort may be that the child needs some resources to cope with certain things, or maybe simply that this is not the right environment for this kid, period. But we are so hell bent on adapting the child, sort of like adapting the child for the school so they can function in this setting and pass this test and read these books. And I hope nobody's hearing me and saying, are you saying that my kids shouldn't have to learn or read books? No, that's not what I'm saying. Of course not. What I'm saying, though, is that there there is an argument to be made that sometimes these ADD, and I'm doing the air quotes now, ADD, ADHD kids simply have a need for more physical activity, for not being in a room all the time, for learning in bite-sized chunks very intensively, and they would be just fine and they would be very disciplined if that's how it were being done. But because we have this, we have to deliver per the constitution of every state, this free and fair equal education to all students, then all students kind of have to fit into that mold
Yeah.
or else something's wrong.
It's wild to see the juxtaposition of the, I guess, the cultural compulsion to get everybody individualized, right? Which is, you think back 30 years, we didn't have IEPs because that was mostly an advent of the thing that Bush did, the No Child Left Behind Act, and we ended up fragmenting everything, and at the same time saying, you're an individual, be an individual. Oh, by the way, but collectivize within this framework, right? Everybody be the same, but it's okay to be different. It's like, well, no, we're not. We're not accelerating the top kids in certain areas either. We're not giving the really good math students more math and saying, hey, don't worry about all the English. We're saying you must take all the English courses as well, no matter how much you flail and founder, right? And I think it's bizarre to me. I think back to my own childhood, and my mom and my aunt were school teachers forever. They truly tailored the curricula to the kids who needed the best and the most and the less and the not as much, right? They did it right there in the classroom. They didn't have to be compelled through .gov or some document that's federally binding to do it. Like they just did it because that's what education is. So now we've got almost two mutually exclusive ideologies competing. One that says systematically conform every child to a standard, and the other one that says no, be you. It's like, well, which one is it? You can't have both.
The kids pick up on that dissonance, by the way.
They do.
I've had
They do.
enough. I've had enough interaction with students in this setting, and while they may not be able to clearly and succinctly articulate what that looks like or feels like, you can hear it in the stories they tell. They pick
High
up
schoolers
on
for
it.
sure.
Yeah, they will actually refer to the adults in their school as hypocrites. Once they learn the definition of hypocrite, they tend to use it. And I'm seeing cynicism. I'm seeing some degree of almost nihilism, apathy. So you either end up, I shouldn't say either, you run the risk of having students become neurotic that who otherwise wouldn't have, because there's this constant taking their emotional temperature, and they aren't given any space, like you said, to sort of develop that inner strength or ability to cope. And then you also have some other kids who may not present with some kind of outward obvious need. They seem fine according to the school, but inside they're witnessing all this. They're not blind, deaf, and dumb. They see this all going on. And I've talked to kids who will say to me, I tutor, and they'll say, oh yeah, they're the adults in my school, they're idiots, they're this, they're that. Well, is that what we want? Do we really want our middle schoolers and high school kids looking upon the outside world, the adult world, with so much disdain? And you might say, well, every generation looks at adults that way. This is a little different. This feels to me more dark. It's more profound. It's not the typical, like, oh, the old people, they don't know our lingo. This is a little bit more, you people have no idea what you're doing, do you?
Yeah, they seem to be precisely identifying the issue, which is we've done school-based suicide screenings out in the rural schools for quite some time, and again, I'm very proud of that work. And I don't mean to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because in communities where there aren't any services and there are big problems, you want to address them. But to assume that every community has big problems without adequately measuring it first, you're just creating an environment of neuroticism, like you said. And the students now, they're like, they've taken the SOS screenings for years on end. They know the game. Some of them throw their friends under the bus, and we chastise them for it and say, don't make up things. That's rude. Um, but a lot of them are just kind of rolling their eyes. They're like, okay, like I get it now. We're all checking in on each other, and that's good. We changed the culture of an entire community by being present and talking about mental health concerns when that discussion was completely off the table, nay, actually denied. So that's a good thing. But the pendulum can swing too far, and I believe in certain instances, certainly in communities where there are resources, we've swung the pendulum so far that now the kids are, and social media isn't helping this any. The TikTok therapists are wretched in most cases. The pop psych influencers are wretched, and they're seeing these things online, and then they start to see them in their peer colleagues because the professionals on the ground in the schools are saying, hey, look at your friends, check in on each other. That's a good thing overall. I advocate for that. I think that communities should lean in on each other, and you should be mindful of your neighbor and what he or she is going through. But when it's accelerated to seeing things that aren't there and then self-identifying, and then we involve the parents or don't, because that's another issue. If we involve the parents and say, hey, we're seeing this in your kid, and your kid is even acknowledging it and endorsing it, we recommend going to therapy. And then they come into my office and we do what I described earlier, is they say, my kid has dissociative identity disorder. Look, she's slipping into, hallucinations right there. Look, you can see her. She's got tics. It's like, well, that seems performative to me. Is it across every environment? What's the experience here? What are your personalities? And the child can't identify it. All they know is that they need a belonging, and this gives them some belonging. Would that have ever even occurred had the school-based mental health professionals not been on site? I don't know. And maybe we are making things worse. I don't have an answer there. What I do know is that we have not had a conversation. What we have done is just accepted blindly that these services are good, they are holy, they must be incorporated in all curricula across the board. And I don't know that that's a good thing. And apparently I'm a heretic for even daring to question that. But I think I have some street cred because I've been doing it for so long. And I think the ability to at least offer to change my mind bodes well for other people to go, maybe, well, geez, Jake was leading this charge for the last several years. Now he's starting to question whether or not it's good. Maybe I should push back also. I'm not saying get rid of the services. I'm not. I'm saying let's be mindful of who needs them. And I still default to the medical model. As much as we may, recoil at the thought, therapists are still under the medical umbrella. You come in because you're sick, not because you're healthy and you want to get better. That would be called consultation or coaching, which is also valuable. But if you're coming into my clinic, I'm diagnosing you, I'm billing your insurance. What we need is a treatment plan. And that treatment plan starts with a problem, and then it goes to a goal. And then we identify some objectives to that goal. And then we do the interventions. And what we've done is we've inverted that whole ladder. We've started with the interventions, presuming everybody needs it, and we've forgotten what the goal is or if there even is a problem. And I think because of that, we're manifesting problems to justify the interventions. That's not a good thing.
We're turning problems into identities.
Yeah, well, that
So
too. Yeah,
you now
that's part
have
of the whole distress tolerance thing. Because if I don't know who I am, back to your, self-esteem thing, self-esteem's good. Self-efficacy is better, because self-efficacy is all the things that give rise to the self-esteem. Self-esteem can be fleeting if I'm using it, based on my shirt or my hair color or my hair style or my car. Self-efficacy is all the stuff that can't be taken away. You can have good and bad self-efficacy too. If I've done a bunch of things of which I'm ashamed, I'm going to have low self-esteem if I'm focusing on it. So we want to build self-efficacy, absolutely, but we don't build it artificially, and we definitely don't build it in advance of what otherwise could be distressing things like failing an algebra test. Hold on, we got to make sure he's confident before he takes the algebra test. It's like, no, passing the algebra test is what begets the confidence. Like you can't do it. You can't invert
Thank
it that
you.
way.
I keep saying this to parents, and because one of the reasons they accept the strategy that schools have adopted out of hand without really questioning it is it's sort of on the surface sounds like it makes sense. And especially when they
Right.
frame it as, well, don't you do better when you feel confident? And so they almost compare everything to public speaking. For example, like, if you feel confident, you're certainly going to be a better public speaker. But taking an algebra test and public speaking are not identical things. And the assumption that the self-esteem or the feelings of confidence come first, as opposed to are
You
an
can't.
outgrowth of accomplishment or even failure, and then getting up and trying again, that's what's missing. And because they keep telling parents, this is so, this is so, this is so, oh, by the way, we have PhDs and master's degrees and you don't. We're the experts, you're not, and you're not properly trained. We have these credentials. Parents feel hesitant to question it, or they'll even say this is research based.
Yeah.
And then
Well,
I have
they're
to
overriding
educate
their own
parents about
instincts.
what research looks like these days. But I did want to go back to something you said about the kids coming in and they're sort of performing. This is a tough one because the desire to fit in when you are told that belonging and inclusion, all these things, is social credit. That's literally
Mm-hmm.
how you
Mm-hmm.
actually survive in the environment of school, is to have your thing. And there you are, the clinician, and you want to truly help the child. And if you identify as performative, hopefully you can build up their distress tolerance, but you can't go back and change that social order. So there you are in the unenviable position of, in order to help this child be an actual healthy person, I've got to cut off this coping strategy that actually is serving a purpose. And I don't have the power to go in and change the culture of the school. And they're going to go back to school, and there'll be a teacher perhaps, or a peer group, or somebody. If they say, no, I don't really have dissociative disorder, whatever, then it's like, oh, traitor, you're bad, but whatever, or whatever the reason. And yes, hopefully they've built up the distress tolerance to handle whatever is going to come their way culturally. But you've got to focus in your treatment on that too. Oh, and by the way, you're about to go into where people aren't going to necessarily agree with what I've just told you. And so you have to be strong about that too. I don't envy your job at all, because what you're up against is very real for that child. They may be performing, but they're performing because a need has been created by the culture and the social structure of the school.
I really appreciate that you highlighted that, because I use DID because it's so extreme. We almost never see it outside of the videos we make fun of, right? And it's not fair to make fun of people even who are feigning illness for social credit. It's not fair. They're hurting. But let's pull that back to something a little simpler. Let's say alcohol addiction, and we'll say you've got an alcohol use problem and it's impacting your world. You come into care and you go, I have this alcohol problem. Okay. The first thing I would say is it's not a problem, it's a symptom. And that itself is unorthodox in my community. My professional community doesn't talk like that very often, if at all. So I have this framework, this worldview that is my bias, and I stand on it firmly, and that's fine. I'm not going to argue with anybody. It just works for me, and it works for the people I train. That says the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which tells us all the criteria about how to identify things, doesn't tell us how to treat them, doesn't tell us where they came from. It says how to identify it. I believe that all the diagnoses in there are symptoms, not problems. The problems are something that don't have codes attached to them that I can send off to insurance. So the symptom may be alcohol consumption to excess that negatively impacts your life. The problem is the why are you doing alcohol? And that could be lots of things. It could be a terrible childhood full of trauma, abuse, neglect, violence, and isolation. It could be just simply not knowing where you're going in life. It could be you recently suffered a breakup or a loss and you don't know how to cope with it because nothing of that magnitude has ever impacted your life before. But it's not something that has a code attached to it. It doesn't have criteria. It's highly subjective. So the first thing I would do is I would sit with the person who's struggling with whatever they're struggling with, say, whatever you're displaying in here is not you. This is an outward behavioral presentation of how you deal with the thing that you're struggling with. And if I'm successful in getting them to turn their mind around that and go, okay, I'm listening. That sounds like you're probably right. And it almost always works. Very rarely do I encounter somebody who goes, nope, that's just how I am. In which case I say, really, you came out of the womb that way? You came out of the womb with a bottle of Coors in your hand? Like, that doesn't, nobody does that.
Right.
So then
Exactly.
they go, all right, I yield for now. I'll listen to you.
Right.
So let's examine what's behind this and what's motivating you to engage in such a way in your, well, back to the school setting and the kid who's got the bizarre behaviors that aren't functioning. So what else could you do to deal with the hurt that you're experiencing? What else could you do? How could you cope with this? Could you journal? Could you write? Could you play music? Could you, whatever, right? Engage with your parents, God forbid. And then we would work on that. And I said earlier, we don't do fix my kid. So we would engage the family and say, what's going on here? Why can't your kid come to you with the problems? Why are they doing this performative behavior in school? And that's where the healing really starts to occur. Along the way, we start to build in self-efficacy and confidence, just the same as I would with the alcohol use person who maybe had too many DUIs or got fired from work. Say, look, the world's not going to change for you. You have to change and then tolerate the world. Unfortunately, we've got a messaging now that's very loud and very widespread that says, no. The world will change to you. You will compel people into identifying with you as opposed to you getting out of your own way and navigating the world. And I think that's where we get the nexus of identity as diagnosis or diagnosis as identity. And they fold their arms and go, nope, I'm neurodivergent and it's never going to change. It's like, all right, well, cool. I'm neurodivergent too. And I figured out how to change. What's the difference between me and you? And that really shakes them up because it takes it out of this false binary. It takes it out of the artificial presentation, which it is artificial. It's not real. And I think that's why these kids struggle with their fitting in. They've created something that they know isn't them. It's out of a reflexive response to whatever they need. And also along with this is why emotional functioning is important. Shame is a very, very important emotion that we all possess, and it's correlated strongly with guilt. So shame says we fail to meet somebody's expectations. Guilt says go make it right. When you let somebody down, go fix it, go apologize, buy them a cookie or whatever. That emotion is designed to keep us in community. We're designed as human beings to live in tribes because we need each other. We don't all have access to all resources. We're not omnipotent. We're not all-knowing. We don't have the ability within us to survive independently. There is no such thing as independence. It's just not possible. There's also no such thing as, codependence. That's a pop psych term. You have dependence, independence, or interdependence. Independence, I already explained, isn't possible with human beings. So what we look for is interdependence. So we say, look at your tribe. Is that your tribe? Or are you just conditioned to think it's your tribe and you're now performing out of shame and guilt because you think that you're not meeting the tribe's expectations, your peer colleagues at school or whatever, who are shaming you for not doing the right thing or getting the right clothing or going on the right bus or whatever it is. Do you need those people in your tribe? And then we start to look at values. And a lot of these kids don't know what their values are. They've never been asked to do an exercise like that because the parents don't either. They've just fumbled along through life. And they're not bad people. They just don't know why they do what they do. So behind all this is intentionality. If you know why you do what you do and you can take control of your decisions, you can have better authority in your own pattern of decision making such that when examined, you can explain to your audience why you're doing what you're doing. And if they don't like it, that's on them, not you. And you're not beholden out of a shame guilt response to just drop everything you think you believe in to conform to the pressures of the world. So the world's not going to change. You have to change. And if what you're doing isn't working because you're in my office, it's pretty self-apparent that it's not working. You want to change in such a way that you can articulate why you're doing what you're doing. And if you have to leave a certain group to go hang out with another group because that previous group is unhealthy, and they don't want to hear your reasons, you can also be confident in that. That's what I would do with that individual.
Right.
And it doesn't take very long. I mean, I just laid it out in like 5 minutes here or
And
something.
if
But
it
the
doesn't
work is
get
hard.
done in childhood or young adulthood, you can
Very
end up
hard later.
with, peer groups like your own peer group in your own profession, being shamed into things. And you sent me an article before we met up today that seems to kind of get to the heart of that. I didn't know if you wanted to talk about it, but it feels like people like you are, coming under fire if you have a set of values and you want to, practice your profession and
Yeah.
do your job a certain way, that there's increasing pressure for you not to, or to conform to one single set of values, or else something bad. So I don't know if you wanted to address that at all, if you want me to bring up the article. I mean, whatever you want to do, but I think people need to understand that even adults, so we tend to focus on children at this channel and also in this conversation, but children grow up and they go out in the world and they do things. And when they pursue helping professions, if they're still stuck in this shame, guilt response, they may not even be in the profession that they're in for the right reasons, never mind practicing it in any kind of ethical, moral way. And they might even be conscious of it.
Yeah, well, children, what's that old saying? Like, growing up is optional, growing old is mandatory, something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
So children will just age, and whether or not they actually mature is up to a variety of circumstances. And the article that you're referencing is on the Free Press. So if you go to the fp.com, THEFP, the Free Press, or the fp.com, it's called Inside the Campaign to Blacklist, quote unquote, Zionist Therapists. And it's written by Sally Sattel. She's highlighting something that happened in Chicago, state of Illinois. There was a Facebook group or some online forum, there it is, where apparently somebody wanted a Zionist therapist, and you can see it there because the patient's dealing with feelings about the quote unquote the current geopolitical climate. We can only assume it's in response to October 7, and they want somebody who's not going to proselytize them into, anti-Jewish hatred or something like that. So they go into this forum, and somebody offers this thing. They say, hey, does anybody know a therapist who fits these criteria? And several people step forward, say, I can handle this potential patient. And then one individual decided to create a group based on the therapist who'd responded positively and affirmatively, and said, now we know who the Zionists are, and we're gonna put them on a list, and we're gonna blacklist them, and oh, by the way, start outing everybody else you think is a Zionist, including people with Jewish names. And so now this person, I applaud the Illinois licensing board, whatever it's called, but for investigating this. We don't know the outcome yet; it's still going on. But here's the problem: the same people who will blacklist a therapist for certain political views or certain racial proclivities or certain ethnicities or whatever may be in your realm will use the same ethical code to justify what they're doing. And so in our world, we have 5 ethical precepts from which our codes of ethics spring forth. And they are autonomy, justice, fidelity, non-maleficence, and beneficence. I have a whole video explaining this, about how they're all supposed to hang equally in balance, because if you're advocating out of one, you're inherently stepping on another. So, for example, if I advocate for full autonomy for somebody, and the autonomy is the ability for a person to choose his or her own path without my influence. If I say, you're an autonomous individual, Deb, you got to choose whether or not you're going to make decision X or decision Y. I can't interfere. I may be stepping on beneficence, meaning my ability to help. If I'm totally muzzling myself, even though I may have an opinion, maybe a good opinion, maybe a valid opinion, I'm not giving it. So in that instance, I may say to myself, it'd probably be good if you offered Deb your opinion that X is the better path than Y because of all these reasons. I may be acting out of beneficence, but I'm stepping on your autonomy because now I'm helping you decide rather than you helping yourself decide. I happen to think that autonomy is the easiest one to violate because we all have hearts of compassion and we want to see people, healthy and better. So I think autonomy is the easiest one to violate. I think what's happening here is out of a sense of either beneficence because they think that they're doing the right thing, or a sense of justice because they're acting on behalf of somebody else. Then we do this with children a lot, especially children in foster care or state custody. The therapist may be the only healthy adult with whom they consistently interact, right? So the therapist may have a strong opinion about, let's keep this kid in, math, one more year or something, because he continually expresses how he loves math, but is frustrated about whatever, right? I'm giving my opinion. It's out of a sense of justice. I'm acting on behalf of the child. Also maybe beneficence and maybe non-maleficence. I don't want to hurt him, so I don't want to just accelerate him into the next year's math class or whatever. But I'm stepping on his autonomy. I don't know that I'm acting out of fidelity, because fidelity also says I'm going to remain faithful, not just to the financial agreement that we have, but also my own ethical codes and the expectations laid out in the treatment plan. I want to be faithful to that, not just take it on myself. So all these are supposed to hang in balance. And what I see happening is these activist therapists, and it is a thing now. They teach this in school. There's certain universities, you can look them up. I'm not going to name drop, but I have a handful of them off the top of my head that I could list. They openly say, we are here to train therapists to be active in the therapy setting. And the professional associations are signing on this. And the article outlines some of them that say, we advocate that you have to be actively anti-racist, for example. That's a
Right.
popular trope these days, right? So out of a sense of
Chicago
beneficence,
anti-racist therapists. Yeah.
yeah. So out of a sense of beneficence, out of a sense of justice, these therapists are believing that what they're doing is right and wholesome and good. So they're using the same ethical precepts and principles to execute what is tantamount to self-censorship, because now I don't want to stick my neck out. If I'm a firearms owning therapist in Northern Nevada, I might inflame the rage of the gun control people, right? And then they're like, well, we got to get rid of Jake and put him on a list and never refer patients to him or whatever. I'm okay with that, because as I mentioned before, I've gone through my own self-efficacy studies and I can articulate why it's important that I do what I do. But I also don't browbeat people in the session. And there's the rub, right? I can stand firmly anchored in a lot of principles of my own private life that may or may not influence my therapeutic interventions. But I should not be bringing that into the therapy office, because when I do, I am absolutely violating autonomy of the patient, who's not there for me and my proselytization. They're
Right.
there to get well. But if I've conflated getting well with me indoctrinating you with my worldview as though it's the not just the best one, but the only one, then I have a tension. And so while I congratulate the Illinois board on investigating this, if I'm the accused, if I'm the respondent to this complaint, the person in this article, I would just say, I'm acting out of ethic. I point to my professional association that tells me to do this, and the board is in a double bind because they've warped the spirit of the ethic. And I'll bet this person gets off. I'll bet they don't get wrapped with anything. And that's the tough climate in which we now find ourselves. Thank God we have places like the Open Therapy Institute and Andrew Hartz, who are advocating for an elimination of political bias and cultural bias in therapy, because it's rampant, and it's so rampant that it's actually being taught in graduate schools, and graduates are coming out really confused because they've got the victim mindset. They've got the world is against you mindset.
Right.
They're being taught to affirm the patient, whatever illness they've self-identified through their self-diagnosis on Google or WebMD or TikTok or whatever. And we're not actually helping. And I think that's really, really bad. It runs afoul of the whole reason this profession exists. If I'm trying to help you, Deb, through my lens, all I'm doing is at best I'm creating a clone of me in you, and at worst I'm making you sick because I'm not addressing the reasons you came in the first place. And now I am being maleficent. I'm hurting. I'm not
Right.
helping.
Well, so my final question, I guess, would be, and I'm sure people listening have this too. What, if anything, should we do differently to try to roll this back, or, address this? And what do you think is possible? So the first one is your recommendation. The second one would be your opinion in terms of the likelihood that we could make what you think should happen. Uh, and finally, if we can't, what do you recommend to individual families for their individual children if they find themselves in a district or in a situation where, for whatever reason, there's no momentum and there's no initiative to go, kind of roll this back, and they see things just continuing, but they want to protect their own children? So the first thing is, what do you think should be different?
I'm going to walk backwards in the way that you asked that question. I'm
Oh,
going to
that's
start
fine.
with a somewhat unorthodox and unpopular opinion among my people. I know we like to talk like this, but walking it out is very different. And
Sure.
so I'm trying to work myself out of a job. So what should parents do? You should study what I studied in school and learn it yourself. Not become full-fledged, junior clinician or anything, but watch emotional function videos, digest some William Glasser books, read some Carl Jung, like get into the function of the human psyche, the human mind, anchor yourself in some principles. Jordan Peterson's great. Self-authoring, 12 rules for life, like basic stuff. Make your bed. Find what your values are for your family. Anchor yourself in something. I always ask, what is your spiritual affiliation, to whoever walks through the door? Because people with a spiritual affiliation of any kind tend to default to what that influence is in their life because it's bigger than they are. And so then it's a lot harder to get wrapped around the axle of the cultural winds that blow of things of the world. Sure. So if you got something bigger than yourself, and I don't even care what it is, just anchor yourself there. And it makes it a lot harder to get unmoored when the winds blow. So I would say, study this stuff. I'm trying to work myself out of a job. That's why I come on shows like yours and I produce podcasts and videos of my own, because I want people to solve these problems in their own kitchens and living rooms and workspaces without having to come through my door all the time. So it sounds a little weird for an entrepreneur to say that, but look, if everybody gets healthy and I have 8 years left on this lease, I'll turn it into a brew pub and a coffee shop. I say that all the time. The second thing is, what can we do to help realign, I guess, with the established values of this profession? I think we have to articulate why we do what we do, which means we have to be anchored in our own values and not just go along to get along. We have to be mindful that the consumer base that we're trying to reach is the target audience, not our peer colleagues, not our mentors, not our supervisors, not our professors. They don't matter. What matters is the people we're serving. And if the people we're serving are being pushed away because they view us as having an ideological tilt that they don't agree with, that's problematic. But if they view us as having an ideological tilt that they're going to be exposed to and proselytized about, that's worse. Now we're pushing people away from care. And this dovetails nicely into the firearms mental health nexus in which I walk too, because a lot of firearms owners are afraid to come into counseling because they don't want their rights taken. And their perception is, through red flag laws, which is the law that allows a family or law enforcement officer to take your guns if they think that you're a danger to self or others. Those laws have now included people like me. My profession is now listed as one of the ones who could trigger a red flag law and have the deputies come knock on your door to steal your stuff. In Colorado, in New York, Washington State is kicking the tires on it. It's getting worse, right? So we're pushing people away from care now, which I would argue is tantamount to maleficence. They're getting worse. And Walk the Talk America, which is the organization I was on to talk about before, is at its core a suicide prevention organization. Firearm suicide specifically, because it comes from the firearms industry. If people are taking their own lives, and they're taking their own lives because they can't get into care, perceived or real threat, that's a problem. So we need to anchor ourselves, stand on ethical principle, and say, in here, you're safe. You don't know my political bias. You don't know my political leanings. And even if you do, because you've seen me on multiple podcasts talking about lots of things, you can rest assured I'm not going to bring it up in here. I'm not. Of course I have my beliefs. I'm very strong anchored beliefs. I would be very inconsistent if I didn't. But they're not your beliefs. Your beliefs are your beliefs. I don't care what you're struggling with. I don't care where you come from. Come into Jake's office and Jake's going to give you pretty good care, right? If you happen to know that won't interfere. That's what we have to do. We have to be as active and vocal as the activists who are trying to be active and vocal, but in neutrality. And it's a very bizarre statement to say, I have to be active in my own neutral advocacy, because it doesn't make any sense. You're going to tell me what you aren't? Like, it's weird, but that's where we are. And I think the reason that we're not and the reason that we're so easy to succumb to this type of, loud, screechy fringe capture is because for years and years and years and years, we have self-deprecated as a profession to the point that we just live in the shadows and we don't ever emerge. We think that we're the only ones who hold confidential information privately. We're the only ones who have the market cornered on help and healing. We're pretty full of ourselves, to be quite honest. And what that's turned into is a failure to engage the community. I don't know what the dental code of ethics says. I'm sure that they have an ethic against solicitation, but how many dental commercials do you see for the big corporate entities, right? They're out there advertising. Lawyers advertise all the time. Financial advisors advertise all the time, TD Ameritrade and all this, but like, they all handle confidential information, but they're not going to go spewing it in public. but they can be out there advocating for things. They give financial literacy courses. They give free attorney advice, on certain days of the week. The dentist will do, roving caravans of, dental work on, rural communities or whatever. Like, it's okay to be out there advocating for our profession. It's okay to advertise. It's okay to say, hey, here's some knowledge that I gained in graduate school. You have it for free. Go solve your own problems and stop coming in here. And I think the reason that threatens people is, go back to the money. We're largely insecure. We're terrified that we're going to lose our jobs. It's like my identity as therapist. It's like, well, if I'm not a therapist, what can I be? Well, I just told you I could be a brew pub and coffee shop owner. I don't have to be a therapist. It's not who I am. It's just something I do. So I think that's the how we combat this. We get very loud and very active and say, with me, you're safe. I understand all the noise out there. There's activism, blah, blah, blah. With me, you're safe. And here's why you're safe. I'm anchored to these principles. They're pinned to my wall. Hold me accountable anytime you want. Zephyr intake form even has links to all the AMFT, the ACA, the NBCC, and the NASA ethical codes. Like, if you want to hold me accountable to something, bring it up. And if I can't articulate with intentionality why I'm doing what I'm doing, fire me. I should be able to tell you every time why I'm choosing a certain intervention or a certain series of words every single time.
Right. Now, in your case, so you were doing school-based work, but you were still essentially independent in the sense that you weren't literally the employee of the district directly. And I would argue, but correct me if I'm wrong, if you think I'm wrong, because I'm not in your shoes, that is preferable for me as a parent on the outside to the school hiring school-based counselors who work for the state, because that gives them that quasi-social service role. Their actual boss is not the parent or the child, or, that's not really who you're serving. You're serving the state. And there's that murkiness around the ethical considerations and where your allegiance lies. Now, to your point, the ethical considerations are still what they are about maleficent and all this stuff. However, I think it becomes harder for the individual therapist to hold the line when you answer to a standards board, or like literally, it's not just I go get my license but my day to day, every single day is I don't really work for student A or student B. I work for the principal of the school or the head of the counseling for the district or whatever.
You're getting into a topic that I have a podcast called Noggin Notes that I've been doing for about 7 years. And one of the recent episodes, I compare burnout, moral injury, and compassion fatigue. And compassion fatigue is not a real word. It's something that we made up to make ourselves feel good about having bad boundaries. And I'm very opinionated on that. And I don't think compassion fatigue is a thing. It's just not. And I explained that in the podcast. I'm not going to get into it here. But what you're talking about is moral injury. Moral injury is when your own personal ethics or values rub up against the corporate ethics or values of the workplace. So this is very, very popular. I shouldn't say popular. It's very common in hospital settings where a big corporate hospital is applying pressure to the treating practitioners, the physicians, the surgeons, whatever, the nurses, to do things that benefit the hospital system rather than the patients, as it happens all the time. And moral injury is a real problem. So in a school setting, if I'm a contracted entity, I do what I want. I have my own forms. I have my own EHR. The kids are my patients. In a school setting, you're right. You can have a school counselor, and school counselors have different ethical codes. And usually those ethical codes say, don't treat mental illness. You're not there to treat mental illness. You don't have the license. You don't have the training. Don't do it. My licensing board could potentially hit a school counselor who's doing quote unquote treatment in the school setting with a practicing out of scope or practicing without a license complaint. It'd be ugly. The process is Byzantine. It's an administrative violation, not a legal violation. There's a whole bunch of stuff here that confuses people, not just the consumer. The consumer's confused enough. They don't even know where to turn if they think that their kid's being warped by some school counselor or social worker or whatever it is. And they've got all different names for these types of people all over the place, the paraprofessionals, quasi-professionals, whatnot.
Right.
So, but the point is, if they're employees of that setting, you don't know who's the boss. And one of the things that I'm noticing now too is there's companies out there who are selling products to the schools, and these products look, walk, talk, act like an electronic health record system because they are. But they're representing themselves as interdisciplinary software. So you can have in one setting your grades, your contact with the counselor, the groups that you went to, the schedule, all sorts of things, right? And we don't know really who has access. They'll say that it's just the mental health professional has access to just the mental health portion of the record. Okay, that's an issue unto itself. We don't know whose eyeballs are falling out and whether or not consent was granted. But then we have to wonder, well, what is the school counselor? And I'm using school counselors very specifically here because I have one and I know several who are in this tight bind. They're saying, my principal, the district, the dean, whoever is asking me to do this service, and I don't know that I can. Some of them even have dual licenses, which makes it even murkier. They say, I don't know that putting a kid in a trauma recovery group is treatment. They say it's psychoeducation. I think it may be treatment. But to identify the kids for the group, we have to issue this screening tool. And the screening tool yields signs of depression. Am I diagnosing? Am I recommending care? And I would say you may not be diagnosing. Screening tools are just screening tools. They just give us an indication of what somebody's dealing with. But are you treating? And I would say, yes, you absolutely are treating. Now, is it the right thing to do? Probably. The kids could use it. But are you seeking consent from the parents? And the forms that they send out are blanket forms. It says, do you authorize the school to do school-based MTSS services? And that's all it says, services, right? Well, what's a service? Is it a one-on-one conversation in a private setting with a school counselor for 15 to 30 minutes talking about deep, dark stuff that's going on at home? If I'm the parent, I don't know that my signature on that blanket form indicates that level of precision and me giving consent. And so I would argue that that's consent. That's treatment without consent. They'll argue that it's not. They'll argue that it's not treatment. But I as a parent would absolutely want to know if my kid is talking to a school counselor about very deep, personal, private things. And of course, as you well know, there's a movement that is advocating not to tell parents at all. And California is very famous for this. Just passed a bill that said that,
Minnesota.
Minnesota, not only should you keep it private, you must not tell the parents. And their whole justification for this, again, defaulting to the autonomy or the ethical principles, they say, if we tell the parents, it will cause them harm. We cannot be maleficent to the children because those ugly parents don't know what we knew. We are the be all end all for the intervention to your child, and that's really spooky stuff. So I think there's probably going to be lawsuits coming out of this. I hope that nobody's license gets jeopardized. I really hope that moral injury doesn't occur at the rate that beyond the rate that it already is. But that kind of stuff scares me. If you're a parent listening, make sure you read every form and make sure you understand all the terminology. And if you see a word like services, those services better be delineated very, very articulately and enumerated very clearly so that if and when a service is rendered that is not on the list, or you disagree with one of the services that is listed, you just don't sign the paper. So that's my recommendation. Be aware of what's going on. And if you're a professional listening to this, if you're a school counselor, or you're a school-based mental health worker, please understand what is being asked of you and whether or not it's in the scope of your practice as a licensed professional, because you're all licensed, whether you're licensed through the Department of Ed or you're licensed through an occupational board like I am. You have some sort of license that allows you to practice. Make sure that you know your boundaries, because the last thing you want to be asked is, what did you know and when did you know it, and why is your name listed in the defendants? That's really spooky stuff. So don't do it just because your principal says so, or just because the grant funding people said so, or the educational management organization thought it was a good idea. Your license is yours. It doesn't belong to anybody else. And it's okay to push back. Again, evaluate your tribe. If the dean is not in your tribe, go find another school, and don't tolerate workplace bullying just because they, succumb to the sales pitch from the software company.
Awesome. Great advice. Well, Jake, this has been so eye-opening and educational, even for me, as we discussed before the show.
Even for you, Deb.
No, but what I'm saying is, you said, oh, you're up to your, neck in this. And I'm like, yeah, but there's only so much that one person can research or know. And that's why I like to talk to people like you who really are day-to-day involved with this. And I would urge the people listening to go back through some of this and take some notes, because we just got a master class, I feel like, in the current state of therapy in general, what the therapists are facing, what the students are facing in schools. And while I'm sure there's way more detail, you got the big picture. And if you are sending your children back to school today, or this week or next week, you really need to know, as you said, what are you signing, what could go on in there, and if your child is going to be referred for some kind of even just an IEP or a 504 plan, understand what that could potentially mean for your child, in terms of their own self-perception and all of the things that we discussed. So I'm very grateful, and I thank you for coming back and talking to us. Any final words, or where should we find you? How can people follow your work?
X, Jake Wisk, JakeWisk. If you want to do there. If you want to look at the emotional functioning videos, are available at zephyrwellness.org. Just type in emotional functioning and it'll pop right up. Anybody over the age of about 10 can digest those and make use of them. I actually just watched with my 9-year-old the other day. He was very impressed, I think. That's not just me fluffing myself, but anybody over the age of 10 can watch the emotional functioning videos and learn how their brain responds to the environment. I think it's super powerful. If you've ever seen the movie Inside Out, it's that, but like more precise. I love Inside Out.
Have you seen the second one?
I have not.
It's so good. I went with my teenager, my youngest, and we were holding hands through most of it, and we kept looking over at each other, and at a couple of points we had like little tears. It is really truly wonderful. And for those listening who are concerned because they're so used to politics being infused in so much of what Hollywood puts out, let me reassure you, this is just actually a really real and wonderful look at this same character that we saw years ago, but maturing to the next level of emotional development. And whoever wrote it, I think, really knew what they were doing. I'd love to, when you've seen it, I'd love to have another conversation with you about it, because I'd love to get your take as somebody who does this work. I found it to be wonderful. I loved it.
My take on the first one is it's as accurate of a metaphor as we could put into a film. The only critiques are that there's 5 emotions and not 10, which would be overwhelming. And
but she was
from what I hear about that's true. There is some merit to that too. And the second one, they've gone with some quote unquote emotions that are not emotions, like ennui and anxiety, and that's all fine. Like the metaphor still applies. And I think if you learn something about your own neurological functioning from it, that's good enough. But check out the videos, and Noggin Notes podcast, Guns and Mental Health podcast, wherever podcasts are found. You can hear me rambling about various other topics.
Well, we appreciate you. So thank you so much for being here. Thanks to everybody for watching the video, for listening on the podcast. And we will see you again next time. Take it easy.